Hello and welcome to our very first online event. This event was originally streamed live on the 27th of January for the Holocaust Memorial Day. Unfortunately, the sound quality of the recording ended up poor, so we decided to re-record it. I'm Claudia, Project Manager for the Jewish History Association of South Wales. And before we start, I wish to say just a few words about who we are and what we do. The organization was set up in November 2017, and we work to preserve the tangible and intangible heritage of the Jewish communities in South Wales and to share it with the wider public. The research into the memorial tablet is part of our second project, Framing Jewish Histories, which started in October 2019 and has been supported by grants from National Lottery Heritage Fund, Jewish Historical Society of England, Jewish Memorial Council, and Cardiff University. The presentations in this video are delivered by three of our volunteers, Claire, John, and Laura, and I hope you find them of interest. I would like to introduce now our first speaker, Claire Rowe.
My name is Claire, and I've been a volunteer with the Jewish History Association of South Wales since October 2019. I've been working on the Memorial Tablet project, and so far I've researched 13 names and I still have one on the go. My role today is just to give you a brief history of the Memorial Tablet itself. The Memorial Tablet can be found in the Cardiff Reform Synagogue, and I'm just going to give you a very quick history of the Cardiff Reform Synagogue. It was originally known as the Cardiff New Synagogue and was founded in 1948 by two members of the Cardiff Jewish community who aimed to provide a less traditional style of religious services than had previously been available in Cardiff. This new style of worship, which still adhered to Jewish values and customs, was admired by newly arrived immigrants from other parts of Europe, where the Reform movement was already well established. At the beginning of the Cardiff New Synagogue, services were held in the Temple of Peace at the Cardiff Civic Centre, but there was always a desire to establish a more permanent home. So in mid-1952, the community purchased their current home. And as you can probably tell from the photo, this building was previously Mount Tabor Primitive Methodist Chapel, which had been built in 1874 in the Adamsdown area of Cardiff. The memorial tablet itself can be found on the back wall of the synagogue. The memorial was erected in memory of relatives of synagogue members who had died in the Holocaust and whose graves are unknown. Discussions about creating a memorial tablet began not long after the community moved into their permanent home. The first mention of it was in October 1952. A memorial committee had been established, and in November 1952, they sent the following letter to all members. It reads, "It has been decided by the Council of the Synagogue to erect a memorial tablet where may be placed the names of those relatives of members who perished through the Nazi terror and whose last resting place is unknown." It goes on to say that anyone desiring a dear one's name to be placed on the memorial should fill in and return the enclosed questionnaire. So here we have a copy of the questionnaire that was given to members. It asks for the names of parents, children plus their spouses, wife or husband, brothers and sisters plus spouses, and finally, grandparents or grandchildren. Then it asks for their full name, their relationship to the person, their former town of residence, and their approximate age. As you'll see when I show you the memorial tablet, ages were not ultimately included, but names and towns of residence were. The original meeting minutes from the Memorial Committee discussing the tablet still exist and can be found and viewed freely on the Jewish History Association of South Wales's archive on the People's Collection Wales. Here we have the internet address for this, and if you do a general search for the acronym JHASW, you'll bring up all the items related to the Jewish History Association of South Wales. And where it says search users items, if you type in memorial tablet, it will bring up items specific to the memorial tablet. By the 30th of November 1952, 36 names had been received, and this rose to 54 by the time that works began. The committee appointed the prominent Cardiff sculptors W. Clark of Llandaff, who were a family firm of sculptors and whose work spanned back to the 1800s, and who especially undertook work in churches and places of worship in Glamorgan to construct the memorial. The memorial tablet is made from highly polished timber with gilt lettering. All costs were borne by members. Work on the tablet was completed in April 1954 and was hung shortly thereafter. There was a consecration service for the unveiling of the tablet on the 3rd of October 1954. And as before, a letter was sent out to all members, inviting them and encouraging them to attend the special service. A copy of the order of service was preserved, and once again, you can view this and all the other material related to the creation of the memorial tablet on the People's Collection Wales. Here we have a picture of the board shortly after it was erected. I'm not sure if you can read the inscription, but it reads, "This tablet is erected in memory of the relatives of members of this synagogue who perished by Nazi oppression and whose graves are unknown. May their dear souls rest in peace." In 1999, a member who had joined after 1954 requested to add the names of her family that had died in the Holocaust to the tablet, and this initiated a renovation of the tablet. Members were once again asked if they wished to have family members included. This resulted in a list of 48 additional names to be added. W. Clark once again carried out the works. They added new names and regilded all the existing names. They also refurbished the Hebrew lettering and dedication panel, giving the panel an almost new appearance. So here we have the panel as it looks today, with 102, almost double the original number of names inscribed in gilded lettering. It is these 102 names that we volunteers have been tracing over the last year or so. It has not been an easy task, as many members have since moved away or passed away. So it has not always been possible to trace a connection back to the Cardiff Reform Synagogue. But it is important to us that these 102 people are not just names on a board, but that they are remembered as fathers, mothers, sisters, and brothers. They had families and jobs and communities. We feel that the whole of their lives should be remembered and celebrated, not just the manner of their deaths. If you can recall the questionnaire that was sent to members in 1952, asking them for names of family members, it only included requests for immediate family. However, our research has found in many cases, for example, when someone has commemorated a sister or brother, that sibling had children and even grandchildren who were also murdered in the Holocaust. Whilst members were unable to commemorate nieces and nephews, we have tried to include them in our narratives so that they are also not forgotten. Sadly, these questionnaires have been lost or misplaced, as they would have provided us with some great sources of information where we could have found family members. And as such, we've been unable to trace descendants for every name on the board, but we have been lucky enough to find information, albeit of a varying degree, for every name bar one on the board. Some challenges we faced were when information given at the time was wrong, mostly for the town of residence, but in some cases, first names were also wrong. Spellings also proved tricky. Again, some were wrong, whilst others had been anglicised for the board from their original Eastern European origins. It is important to remember, though, that some of these members were very young during these traumatic times, so it is easy to see how memories can be mistaken, and at the end of the day, our volunteers have found each person named in spite of this. Now, before I hand you over to John, another volunteer, I would just like you to cast your minds back to when I said that we try to honour members of everyone in the family that were killed in the Holocaust. If you look at these names of David and Fanny Engel of Brno, Czechoslovakia, David and Fanny Engel had 4 children, Hilda, Isidor, Greta and Lisa. Hilda moved to Wales with her husband Hans and children in 1939. Hans was getting bad vibes from listening to Hitler's speeches, so decided to come to Wales in 1938, where he started an embroidery factory in South Wales. David sent machines from Czechoslovakia. Hans's daughters went to boarding school in Wadebridge, and in 1939, following Hitler's annexations, he persuaded the headmistress to send a telegram to his wife Hilda to say that one of the girls was desperately ill and that she needed to come to Britain immediately. Hilda used this telegram to persuade occupying German forces to allow her to leave, and she arrived in Dover in March 1939. David and Fanny Engel were sent to Theresienstadt, along with the rest of their children, albeit on different transports, and their families in 1942. There was a short period of a few weeks when they were all in Theresienstadt together. Their son Isidor, his wife Olga, and 4-year-old daughter Hannah were sent on to Isbicka, Lublin, although Isidor was not taken to the ghetto with his wife and young daughter and was instead sent to Majdanek labour camp, where he can be found in the camp's death book some time later. Olga and Hannah did not survive the conditions at Isbicka. Fanny and David's daughter Greta, along with her husband Max and 13-year-old daughter Ruth, were sent from Theresienstadt to Treblinka. Treblinka was an extermination camp, and the family were likely gassed upon arrival. David and Fanny themselves were sent to Treblinka 2 weeks later. Lisa was the youngest daughter of David and Fanny. She and her son Fritz remained at Theresienstadt for 3 years. Lisa was a nurse, which probably explains why they remained there for such a long time, as there were many sick and elderly Jews in Theresienstadt. However, Lisa and Fritz were sent to Auschwitz in May 1944. Fritz was 16. Once at Auschwitz, they were sent to family camp B2. The younger and fitter was selected for labour, and 16-year-old Fritz was one of these. Lisa was gassed, unfortunately, in the Auschwitz gas chambers on the 10th of July 1944, when family camp B2 was liquidated. However, Fritz survived the arduous conditions of the labour camp and was liberated by Soviet troops 76 years ago today. He was one of only a very few child survivors that had been deported out of Theresienstadt to the east. So I think it's very fitting that we remember David and Fanny Engel and all of their lost family members today, 76 years to the day that their 17-year-old grandson Fritz was one of only 7,000 to be liberated from Auschwitz. I shall now pass you to John, another volunteer, who's going to talk you through the process that we go through in order to research each name. Thank you very much for listening.
My name's John Farnhill. Like Claire, I've been a volunteer of the Jewish History Association of South Wales since November 2014. Researching the memorial tablet has been a bit of a learning curve. I knew very little about Jewish culture and customs, even less about these in Eastern and Central Europe during the 19th and 20th centuries. So apologies if I make mistakes along the way. Before we start, I'd like to thank everybody on behalf of the volunteers for the help that they've given us during these past few months, particularly any relatives or organizations that have provided us with images, information and stories about those who are on the tablet. There you have an image of the tablet, and on it we have the names and the towns of the people we are researching. Firstly, with the names, as Claire said, we have no idea whether they're spelt correctly in the first place. And as for the towns, well, they may be the place they were born, the people who were born. It may be their main residential address, or it may be the place where they were last known to have lived. No indication either as to the relationship between any of the people. If the people named on the tablet come from have the same surname and come from the same town, then we can reasonably assume that they are most likely are related. But there are brothers and sisters on there with different surnames who are related, and it's often been a bit of a challenge or a bit of a coincidence, a bit of luck, if you like, when we find out that they are related. In one case, there are 5 names on that tablet with different surnames, 3 different surnames, who are in fact members of the same extended family. The first thing we need to do is to establish who these people are, and the first place we go to is the Yad Vashem Institute in Israel. You're probably all aware of the hall of names there that is pictured, but they also have a research and documentation department. They've been collecting documents ever since the institution was established, and they've got a vast collection of information about the people who disappeared in the Holocaust. Yeah, all 6 million. It's obviously a work that is ongoing, and they admit that themselves, that they don't have all the information that they want. They have a very good search engine on their site. You enter the name of the person you're interested in and where they came from, and it comes up all the different sources of information, all the different records that they have in their system. May not be everything, but it's a good start. Here we have the sources cited for Gustav Ribitsa, who is on the memorial tablet. Yeah, these can include records from concentration camps and ghettos, deportation records from places from their place of residence to where they ultimately ended up in a ghetto or an extermination camp, and also, which was one of the first places we go to, is the pages of testimony. These were submitted by the relatives of the victims, by the relatives who survived. Quite often, there are several submitted for the same person. Here we have the same person, Gustav Ribitsa, and it is submitted by Sabine Pincus, his niece, who lived in Canada. And it includes their names, where they were born, their date of birth, name of parents, name of spouses, where they were last seen, and what the fate was that the person believed happened. Yad Vashem is just the one source. Yeah, there are other sources that are available for initial inquiries. One of these is the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington. This serves the same function as Yad Vashem, but in America. And there's the Adelson Archives in Germany. This institute comes under the UNESCO banner and includes many of the original documents. It's in Germany, they've got the original German documents. Both of these institutions, and Yad Vashem, sort of have a program of education and research, very much alike in the work they do. And finally, another good source is Ancestry. This is obviously a subscription based service, but there are many records that are available, and those that are pertinent to the Holocaust are actually free to view for anybody. What we need to do in the first instance is to try and establish a connection to Cardiff. Who was it who put the names on the memorial tablet? We've been looking at Gustav Ribitsa, and here we find in the UK National Archives the file of names of people who were interned in the Second World War, mainly for foreign nationals. And here we see Louis Ribitsa, who turns out to be the brother of Gustav. Well, they were born in the same town, and here he is living in Cardiff in 1939. So through these records, we establish a connection from Cardiff straight back to the family we're seeking. Now, that was an easy one, but on the right here, we've got a more difficult one. Again, it's an internee record, but it's through the female line. The name of the person who put the name on the tablet was a Trude Gower, and you see the name there, but her married name was actually Tsagawa. She changed it, and her maiden name was Magid. And again, so working through the female line and all the various names, we get back to names on the memorial tablet. These relatives, despite having escaped from Nazi Germany and quite possibly having set up a business in Cardiff or in Britain before the Second World War, many of them were interned and some of them were deported, and they've all got their own stories to tell as well. And here we have again Louis Ribitsa living in 35 Hale Don in Cardiff on the 1939 register. This was drawn up by the UK authorities to establish who was living where prior to the outbreak of the war. So now we have a connection to the people we're interested in. What about their lives and their fate? The records we've been looking at so far concentrate on their fate, the records of the Holocaust. So that's where we're going to start. Here we have an example of a deportation record. It shows the deportation of Dorothy Pinkas from Breslau, which is now in Poland, to Theresienstadt in 1942. This record coming from the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum and ultimately from Yad Vashem. Many of these records are online, either by the museum, by the institutions themselves, or by private websites. And these deportation records, in this case, it shows the name of the person you're interested in, a maiden name, when they were born, their last where they were born, their occupation, none, and their last known address. This particular document, I suspect, is the record that was actually kept at Theresienstadt, because annotated here, you see throughout the document, is the date of death of the people on the list. And Theresienstadt was supposedly a self-administered ghetto by the Jewish authorities. They were sort of managed by a Jewish council, but really under the thumbs of the Nazis there. And as it was technically civilian establishment, they did keep records. And this is the record of the death of Dorothy Pinkas in Theresienstadt. As you'd expect, you get the name of the person, where they were born again, when they died, and what they died from. In this case, it was senile dementia, but Theresienstadt, well, the conditions there were atrocious, and disease and starvation were rife. Being sent to Theresienstadt was almost a death sentence in itself, though some people did survive. If you were sent to a death camp, to an extermination camp, when you arrived, there was a selection process. If you considered fit enough, you might be registered into the camp, in which case you were given a prisoner number. If you weren't selected, then you would have been probably sent to the gas chambers without any further ado, and your death would not be recorded. This document shows that the deaths in the Auschwitz infirmary for one day in 1944. You've got the name, the date of birth, the prison number there in the center of the document, and also the nationality of the people who died there. I think I counted more than 40 names on that list, and this is just a one page. So what about their lives? I mentioned ancestry earlier on, and the German states, the German federal states, have started putting their births, marriages and deaths onto ancestry. And this is an example here of a birth record of Dorothy's daughter, Ernestine. As you would expect from a birth record, there's the father's name, the mother's name, where they lived, and the name of the child. The annotation on the right-hand side is of particular interest. I've highlighted it here, it's bigger, and you can see there that the handwriting there is rather challenging. It's written in the old German current script. Many Germans today would not understand that at all, and it does take a bit to learn it. The second point is that this annotation is the result of a German Nazi edict in 1938. They decreed that all Jews should be given the name Israel if you're a male, or Sarah if you're a female. And in this case, the birth record is annotated to give Ernestine here the second name Sarah. There are some documents I've seen where if you survived, then that edict would have been rescinded further down. And here, and the Jewish communities, they kept their own records as well. These are examples of Jewish records held in the Czech National Archives from the Sudetenland in the Czech, in what was Czechoslovakia, and previously the Austrian Empire. We've got a birth record here of Helen Lowy in Flohai. You've got the name there and the names of her parents. And of particular interest here in the name of her parents, again, the handwriting is challenging, but this is the name of the father, and it also gives the father's parents' name as well down there. And this is the marriage record of Helen and her husband Rudolf in 1907. Again, the Jewish record held by the Jewish community and held in the Czech National Archive. Another challenge is the European geography of the time. In 1900, there were three main empires: the Russian Empire in yellow, the German Empire green, and the Austrian Empire in red there. These empires were broken up in 1919, and again in 1945, and even later, changes in national boundaries took place. Many of the people we're interested in were born and brought up in the areas that have changed hands. Silesia here is now in Poland or Czechoslovakia, and Alsace-Lorraine is now part of France. Yeah, and the names change. Kreuzberg, that was in Germany, is now Kluczbork in Poland, and Flohai and Brunn in the Austrian Empire are now part of Czechoslovakia. And when you're researching that and looking for the houses they lived in, the street names have completely changed. You've got to go back to old maps to have a look to see what the new names of the streets are, and compare them with the old ones. Where are the records kept? Yeah, the bit of a paper chase sometimes. The records from Silesia here, they're kept in Berlin. The records from Alsace-Lorraine, they're actually held in France, in Strasbourg. And the further east you go, the Austrian Empire was massive. Quite often you find records from what is now, if you like, Romania, being held in Vienna. So the tracking down the records is quite a challenge sometimes. And as Claire mentioned earlier on, the family names, they change as well. Even in the same village, you get different spellings of the same name, whether that's a transcription error, whether they might be writing the names as they sounded, or it might be a transcription of the Hebrew. Their given names as well can change. Often children were given Jewish names, European names, and they could change throughout their life. Here we've got Jakob Yitzhak in the middle there, becomes Jacob Isaac. You're in a sort of westernized form, and then that person can be called Izzy to their family. And obviously nicknames, short names, they're used as well. And sometimes names can be changed completely, particularly in cases of emigration. Names were changed to make them easy to pronounce, to sound them less European, less Jewish even. Another good source of information on the lives of the people we're investigating is newspapers. These can show adverts, they show events in lives, newspaper reports, and the like. On the right here at the top, we have an advert for Rudolf Rima, who we saw earlier. It shows him to be a dyer and a dry cleaner in the town of Teplitz, which is in the Sudetenland part of Czechoslovakia. This is 1907. Even though it's in Czechoslovakia, surrounded by Czech-speaking people, it's in a German language newspaper. And here we have his death notice in Prague in 1932. In the center at the top here, we have from 1860. I know that's a long way back, but it shows the liquidation of a firm in Romania. And it's the father of one of the people on the tablet. And even though it's in Romania, it's in a Viennese newspaper. At the bottom here, this is from a Jewish newsletter in Aachen in northwest Germany. So not a national publication. And it shows a meeting of a Jewish organization that is taking place. And on it, we have the name here. If you can see it, of Dr. Rosenthal. That's Adolf Rosenthal, who is on the memorial tablet. And just above him, you will see the name of Julius Hollander. Julius was the uncle of Anne Frank. Anne Frank lived for a time in Aachen. In fact, just around the corner from where the Rosenthals lived. And on the left here, we have the death notice of Adolf's daughter, Marianne, who sadly died in a road traffic accident in 1938. And also her husband, Marianne's husband, Hans, who died in Auschwitz in 1943. Now, this newspaper article is in the Aufbau publication, which is published in New York, and there are many obituaries in there. It's the German language newspaper for the Jews in New York. Address books also give information about the individuals. If you follow them through the years, from 1900 to 1930 or whenever, you can see when people changed their addresses, when they moved on, how they moved up in society, and also for firms as well, where the people had their own companies. You could see what sort of company they had and when they stopped trading, for example, by seeing when they disappeared from the address books. Other sources that we might find. Here we have an extract from a World War I military record. It's the record for Otto Rosenthal. And if it wasn't for this record here, where we can see his parents' name, that we would know that Otto is a brother of Adolf Rosenthal. Without this record, we wouldn't know he was a brother. And for those that went to America, that went to Britain, we have emigration records. Here we have Herman Ribitsa, a cousin, I think, to Gustav, who emigrated to America via Cuba. We can track the people who fled Germany in this way. Now, still very academic so far, but occasionally we hit on gold. This is the Ribitsa family, and over 20 or so years, Gustav Ribitsa and his family corresponded with family in America, and the American family, they saved the correspondence, so we can see, we can get beneath the skin of the people we're looking at. In the center at the back is from Gustav Ribitsa to his family in America as late as 1942. He's already under house arrest, but he's writing still, hoping against hope to get that American visa. He's putting together documentation and he's sending it with the hope, against hope at that time, that he will manage to get a visa. The typewritten letter there is from Rosie Hoffman, his daughter, and it's the first letter she wrote after surviving the Second World War. And again, she's writing to her family in America, and she says in that letter how she had to say goodbye to her father, Gustav, when he was deported to Theresienstadt. And she also explains how she survived the Second World War, being hidden by trusted friends and moving from hiding place to hiding place. And the one at the front there, it's written in English by Gustav to his family in America. And I'll read it because it sort of brings out how they felt, and I'll read it. My dear ones, my dear Ernestine wrote to you already that our dear Rosie, that's the one who wrote the letter home, dear Rosie will marry a Christian physician, Dr. Friedrich Hoffmann. Formerly, we did not consent, but we thought that the chief thing in the life of the character of a young man, the chief thing in the life is the character of a young man and not his confession. So that sort of just an insight into the morals of Gustav Ribitsa. And this is the Ribitsa enterprise. On the left is a Nazi poster showing a map of the town of the city of Weiden, which is where the Ribitsa family lived. And it's a map showing Jewish enterprises. And it says, where do Jews trade in Weiden? And at the bottom it says, Germans, be careful when you do your shopping, don't be a traitor. And the images there are of the two of the dots on the map. We have the shoe shop, which the Ribitsas were partners in, and the shoe factory, where they made their shoes. And here we have the family with Gustav in the middle there. And the little girl there on the right, she is the lady who saved all that correspondence and deposited it at the Leo Baeck Institute. Finally, we talked about the Rosenthals earlier. We talked about Marianne, and we talked about Hans. Now the girl there in the picture is Marianne with their parents, Adolf, her father, and Gertrude, her mother. It was taken in about 1920. And this photo was sent to us by Marianne's daughter, Tom Rosenberg, who survived the war. Yeah, as I said earlier, Adolf and Gertrude, their names are on the memorial tablet. Adolf was a senior judge for the Aachen district, and he was also leader of the Jewish congregation there. The couple were first deported to Theresienstadt in June 1943, and then on to Auschwitz in October 1944. In fact, they were on the last train to Auschwitz before the gas chambers were decommissioned and demolished. It's images like this that sort of they just hit home, and the title of this this talk is More Than Just Names, and to me that image says everything. More than just names. Right, I shall hand back now to Laura, who will take us through the story of one of the people that she's been researching. Thank you.
My name's Laura Harrison, and I've been volunteering with the Jewish History Association of South Wales since September 2019. So far, I have researched 8 names from the memorial tablet, and I have 2 names remaining. Today, we would like to give an example of one of our narratives. It was very difficult to choose just one person, but I would like to share with you all the life of Fritz Pollock, because his narrative highlights many of the issues which have been highlighted by John and Claire. This is Fritz Pollock. He is listed on the memorial tablet with the birthplace or last known place of Brussels. Preliminary searches of the main websites I use, such as Yad Vashem and the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, brought up very little that I could use as a starting point, mainly because there were several people listed with that name, and without a rough date of birth, it's very difficult to narrow down the correct person. For example, searching for Fritz Pollock of Brussels brought up 0 results in the Yad Vashem archive, but a general Fritz Pollock name search gave me 71 hits. This is where I had to start looking at different avenues. Fritz had descendants of his siblings in Cardiff, and although they knew nothing about his story, they were able to give me family names, which helped to narrow things down a little, such as his sisters and brother and their children. They also knew that Fritz's wife had survived along with their daughter, and they thought she was living in Israel, but they had no contact details for them. Another concern was the anglicising of the Pollock name to Pollock when they came to the UK. I searched through various spellings, replacing O's with A's and K's for C's, and still came up empty-handed. It was also possible that Fritz could have been a nickname, often the shortened version of Frederick or Friedrich. So my search field was getting broader and more vague, and still I was finding very little. I was starting to worry that this would be the first name where I could not uncover his story. I tried a general search on Jewish Gen, which is an excellent site for family records such as births, deaths and marriages, but only for certain countries. As I had Fritz listed as born in Brussels, I was not hopeful of finding anything, so I began searching for his siblings. I came across a Joanna and an Elsa Pollock, listed as being born in Vienna, and they had the same parents, Arthur and Julie Pollock. However, there were no records of a Fritz or his brother Albert within the same family. I began doing more generalized Google searches using the family names and came across a website called Genie. A very distant relative of Fritz in the USA had diligently been researching many branches of the family tree, including the Pollock family. It was here that I found my first concrete link to Fritz, as they had traced his birth certificate, and he was actually born in Teplitz in Bohemia, which is over 500 miles away from Brussels. The Genie website had all of the family and their connections listed, along with birth dates and locations, so it was incredibly useful for the facts and figures. But when writing these narratives, you need so much more to bring a person's history to life, and so far I had nothing. I decided that the only way to uncover the personal information was to try and find Fritz's daughter in Israel. I knew that her name was Joanna, named after Fritz's elder sister, but in all likelihood she had married and her surname would no longer be Pollock. I had found the page of testimony submitted to Yad Vashem by Fritz's wife, but it was many years before, so the address was probably not current. It was also in Hebrew, which would have required a translator. Instead, I wrote to some survivor organisations in Israel, but had no response. I also wrote to every person on Genie who had the Pollock family listed in their family trees, and eventually I had a reply from someone who gave me the email of a lady called Tammy. This turned out to be Fritz's granddaughter. Joanna was her mother, but she'd passed away 10 years ago. Tammy was an only child and held all of the documents and photographs that her mother and grandmother to give life to the details of Fritz's story. I will only give a brief outline of the story today, but if you wanted to read the whole piece, Fritz's story, along with a selection of others, will be available on the Jewish History Association of South Wales website, with more stories to follow over the coming weeks. Fritz Pollock was born on the 21st of October, 1895 in Teplitz, which is in modern-day Czech Republic. His father was Albert Pollock and his mother was Julie Schweitzer. He was one of 4 children, with 2 older sisters, Joanna and Elsa, who were born in Vienna, and a younger brother called Albert, who was 9 years younger than Fritz. It is Albert who emigrated to Cardiff before the beginning of the Second World War, and he ensured that Fritz's name was added to the memorial tablet. Even though Fritz was born outside of Austria, he made Vienna his home along with his family. During the First World War, Fritz fought for the Austro-Hungarian army like many other young Jewish men. He was awarded the Tapferkeitsmedal, Silver Medal for Bravery, on the 15th of November 1916 when he was only 21 years old. This medal came with a lifelong pension of 15 crowns per month. I'm still hoping to trace the military record to find out why Fritz earned this prestigious award. The family believe he saved someone's life, but the full details were not known to them. The Austro-Hungarian Empire was dissolved at the end of the First World War, and Vienna became the capital of the Republic of Austria. Vienna had an extremely strong and vibrant Jewish community at this time, and figures from the 1930s show that Jews accounted for around 10% of the city's population. Many were assimilated into the rich cultural life of Vienna, being heavily involved in business, the law, the medical profession, and also the arts and journalism. After Fritz was discharged from the army, he returned to Vienna and trained as a bookkeeper. After speaking with his granddaughter, I also discovered that he was an incredible linguist. He could speak 13 languages, and it took him just 3 months to learn a new one. He was an active member of the Jewish community, where he met and fell in love with a lady named Marie Crowe, who was 18 months younger than him. Marie was from a very large family with 11 siblings. She was extremely accomplished in her own right, being the first woman in Vienna to receive a full scholarship and become a kindergarten teacher. She worked with orphans and made clothes for them in her spare time, and she raised the money to buy the fabrics by putting on plays with her large family. It's detail like this that really brings the story to life, and you can only find these pieces by speaking to family members. This is where the trail of historical record has to marry with a family's personal oral testimony. It's not always possible to corroborate these personal stories with documentary evidence, but it is just as important to this project to include these family memories as it is the facts and figures. Fritz and Marie were married in 1923 and had 3 children. Sadly, their firstborn twin boys passed away from an illness at just 3 months old. These boys were never registered in the Viennese birth register, so without the family information once again, they would have been lost to documented history. On the 24th of November 1929, a baby girl was born to them called Joanna, presumably after Fritz's sister. Within the family, she was known as Hanau. The young family had only a decade together before the shadow of the Second World War tore them apart. In March 1938, Nazi Germany absorbed the Austrian Republic in what is known as the Anschluss. The Nazis quickly implemented their anti-Jewish legislation, which had been systematically removing the rights and property of Jewish citizens in Germany since the Nuremberg laws were passed on the 15th of September 1935. Only 20 years earlier, Fritz had fought for his country as a proud Austrian, and now all of his rights had vanished. On the 10th of November 1938, Fritz and his family would have been in Vienna during the Kristallnacht pogrom, which saw Jewish businesses and synagogues throughout Germany and Austria destroyed during an organised night of violence. This included the synagogue on Pasmanitengasse, where Fritz and Marie were married. The site of this former synagogue is now a block of flats. After this, Vienna became a centre of mass Jewish emigration, but any Jews who stayed had to be registered and begin to wear the yellow Star of David on their clothing for identification. It did not take the Nazis long to realise that Fritz had a talent for languages, and in 1940 the Gestapo arrived at the family home at Hollagasse 51 and took Fritz to carry out translation work. It was the last time the family would see each other. Marie now realised the dangers facing her and her daughter, so she packed a suitcase and fled on foot with Hanau to Belgium, where they briefly found shelter in a convent until the authorities were notified. They then survived by living and working on farms. Marie changed her name briefly to Janine and retrained as a seamstress, and they stayed in Belgium for the remainder of the war. Unfortunately, the years between Fritz's arrest and his arrival in a transit camp in France are undocumented. We can only speculate that either his usefulness to the Nazis had come to an end, or perhaps he refused to cooperate or attempted to escape. Whatever happened, the next time we pick up Fritz's story is when he arrives at the Drancy transport camp on the outskirts of Paris. Drancy was established in August 1941 and was used to imprison foreign-born Jews in France before finally being used for all of the Jews in the country. There were 5 surrounding subcamps used to store the personal property that was confiscated from the prisoners. A document found at Drancy shows Fritz's name and date of birth, along with his ex-Austrian status. Fritz's name is the 4th name down on the list. This image of Fritz would most likely have been taken shortly before his deportation from Drancy. His transport left Drancy for Auschwitz-Birkenau on the 31st of August 1942. This transport was particularly notorious as it included 200 French Jewish children who had been rounded up in July. Winston Churchill mentioned this transport in the House of Commons a week later on the 8th of September, when he describes their deportation as the most bestial, the most squalid and the most senseless of all the Nazis' offences. The full extent of the Nazis' crimes were yet to be uncovered. It took Fritz and the other passengers 2 days to reach Auschwitz-Birkenau, sealed in cattle cars with no food or water and only 1 bucket for sanitation. Upon arrival at the sidings on the 2nd of September, an SS officer would have separated the men from the women and children, then decide which of the passengers were fit to work. Workers were given a striped uniform with a yellow Star of David and a tattooed number on their forearm. Anyone considered too old, young or frail to work were led to shower blocks and asked to undress, and the heads of the women shaved. This was a carefully orchestrated plan to avoid mass panic on the platforms. Every effort was made to ensure the prisoners would believe they were just showering and their belongings would be returned to them afterwards. The shower heads in these blocks were fake, and canisters of Zyklon B pellets were poured into hatches in the ceiling. When these were mixed with water, a deadly cyanide gas was produced, taking several minutes to kill everyone inside the chamber, including Fritz Pollock, who was only 46 years old. Prisoner groups known as the Sonderkommando would remove the bodies, search them for jewellery and gold teeth. Their personal belongings were taken to large warehouses, which the prisoners called Canada. Exhibits at the camp today still show the piles of shoes and bundles of ladies' hair taken from around 40,000 prisoners. The bodies were then burned in large pits or crematoria ovens, and their ashes were used as fertilizer on the surrounding fields. The hair taken from the women was packaged and sent to German companies to be turned into felt, or hair cloth, which was used to make waterproof blankets for U-boat crews. Today marks the 76th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz-Birkenau. On the 27th of January 1945, the Russian Allied forces entered the camp, and the world came to know the true horror of what had been taking place in the death camps of Poland. Fritz's remains will forever rest in the forest surrounding the camp with over 1.1 million of his fellow victims, and I wish I could write a story for every one of them. Fritz never knew what became of his wife and daughter. It would have brought him comfort to know of their safety in Belgium. When the war ended, Hanal married a soldier named Konstantin on the 11th of October 1945, and Marie, Hanal and Konstantin emigrated to Israel, where their descendants still live. Hanal and Konstantin had 1 daughter, Tammy, and Tammy's son has been given the middle name of Fritz to carry his great-grandfather's memory into the future. Due to this project, Tammy was able to exchange email addresses with her cousins in Cardiff, and they've been able to communicate for the first time in many years. So uncovering these past tragedies has led to opportunities for remembrance and communication throughout the post-war generation. Once our narratives have been completed, that's not the end of the process. The Jewish History Association of South Wales is very committed to ensuring the accuracy of the information uncovered. Each narrative is sent to any living relatives for comments and suggested edits. We then forward them on to a small team of people who will take our pieces and fact-check them, including dates, place names, and their spelling. We also have a volunteer who helps with any German translation or transcription work that we come across in document searches. Another important part of the process is ensuring that we have all of the correct copyright permissions. There is another member of the team who follows up on these. By the time the piece is completed, it has been passed through the hands of several people who really care about these stories and the families involved. Many of us have commented that we feel a very close connection to the people that we've researched, and it has been a real privilege to be involved in memorialising their stories for future generations. Thank you very much.
Thank you for watching. I hope you found the presentations of interest. If you wish to find out more about the work we do, have a look on our website and social media. Details for both can be found below. Thank you.